Hot take. Why America shouldn't pull troops from Afghanistan right now. Hot take. Let's check it out.
Listen the fuck up. If you're watching this and you're a lefty and you live in America, or even if you don't live in America, most likely you live in America, you are probably anti-war. Hypers in chat, if you're a lefty and you're anti-war, you don't like
Turn speed up.
the way that America engages with other countries.
Hypers in
like
chat.
Imperialism and what have you.
Can we get some hypers in chat
Hypers
right
if that
now?
applies to you.
Hypers now.
Damn right. Damn fucking right you are. So, if you've heard the news that Biden plans to pull all American troops out of Afghanistan by September 11th of this year, you were probably pretty happy to hear that news. I was when I first heard about it. Like,
I was pretty unhappy to hear that news actually, because I'm someone who isn't a fucking moron who doesn't pay any attention to anything. So I knew immediately that it was actually a delay, right? Let's check this out. There, President Biden to withdraw all US troops from Afghanistan by September 11, extending Donald Trump's May 1st deadline. Okay, so Trump had already agreed with the Taliban to withdraw US troops by May 1st this year, okay? So if you heard Biden say he's withdrawing them on September 11th and you thought, fuck yeah, good job, Biden, right? Instead of, hey, wait, wasn't there an agreement to get them out by May 1st? That is kind of a crucial part of the peace process. Then one, you either weren't paying attention and you probably shouldn't be talking about this, or two, you knew that and you're lying about it now in your video, right?
whoa, wow, cool. Yeah, I mean, we've been there for almost 20 years now. We invaded in 2001. It's been like the longest war in American history. Yeah, we should get the fuck out of there. Yeah, why are we still there? What the fuck? Yeah, let's get out of there, right? You probably thought that, right? I imagine every one of you probably thought that. We're all lefties here, you know? And so I did a lot of research on it.
He did a lot of
As
research.
it turns out, it is probably not a good idea at this time for America to pull out of Afghanistan. In fact, I would strongly argue the outcome of doing that would be far worse than if we stayed. Despite all the terrible...
Wait, let's just look at where my cursor is. Look at me scrolling through the video. I'm interested what research he brings up. I have a feeling he just looks at Google Maps the entire time. So we have Google Maps, Google Maps, Google Maps, Google Maps, Google Maps. It's Google Maps. He's not reading anything. He's just looking at Google Maps. Google Maps. About, what's that? 11, 10, 12 straight minutes of Google Maps, and then he finally gets out of there. Okay. He doesn't bring up any text on the screen. There's not a single article. Nothing. That's his research. He just looks at Google Maps. Are you kidding me? Is it? Yeah, it literally is just Google Maps. That's his research. He just looks at Google Maps and is like, this is what's going on here. Is this your evidence? Is this your source? Does he have sources in the description or something? Am I missing something? No? Okay, let's watch on though. Maybe I'm being uncharitable. I haven't actually seen him do it.
Zan, have you become a neoliberal? You're probably searching my Twitter to make sure I don't have a globe in my name now. Allow me to explain. Before I explain though, I'm gonna give a short history lesson. All right? Afghanistan. I'm gonna bring up a map of Afghanistan right now on the screen. All right? You guys cool with that? You guys cool with the map? I hope you are. As you can see, Afghanistan as a country is right on the edge of Asia and the Middle East. Okay? And if we scroll down and look at it, you can see it's a very remote country in regards to geography. Most of the civilization in Afghanistan are small villages and towns. There are fairly larger towns in there, but for the most part, it's a lot of small villages and towns. Obviously not counting Kabul, which is a very large city. If we get a look at it, very, very large city, Kabul is. But for the most part, it's a very rural country. There's a lot of mountains and desert there, mostly mountains, okay? It is a very, very isolated country geographically, which means if we go back to even recent history, you'll find a pretty interesting detail. Up until fairly recently, Afghanistan was a very, what's the word for it? A very, I guess nomadic would be the word for it. A very nomadic nation. There are a lot of different ethnic groups and a lot of different religions, mostly sects of Islam, that inhabit Afghanistan. Stream pause for a second, that's fine. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that it's very geographically inconvenient to travel to if you don't have, very specific vehicles to do so. This meant that for a very long time, Afghanistan didn't take much part in world politics. That is until the late 70s and the early 80s, during the Cold War. That is in the country, which many of you may think very, very cool. However, America was having none of that. America did not want to have Soviet presence in Afghanistan. Problem was, we were in a Cold War with Soviet Russia. So they had Soviet troops here in Afghanistan. So if we sent American soldiers there to fight them, would be a bad look for a Cold War when both sides have nukes and we're trying not to, end the world, We didn't want to poke that bear too hard. So, what did America do? America engaged in what is called a proxy war.
This guy, does he think his audience are like children? He's like introducing the prospect of a proxy war to them.
Proxy war.
I feel like no, he's saying this because he just learned what a proxy war is himself, like today, and he's like, look at this big fucking word I just learned, proxy war. I mean, it's what a proxy war is evident from proxy war. It's obvious, unless you don't know what a proxy is. In which case, I'm not sure if you're a native English speaker or not.
Is when rather than fighting an enemy yourself with your own people in your own country, you hire essentially a different fighting force to engage in that battle and that fighting for you.
Hire would be mercenaries. He's talking about like support.
So it's not technically you doing it, but it is you. That's what a proxy war is. Now, here in Afghanistan, there are many different sects of Islam. A lot of people, especially in the West, have a tendency to generalize religions they aren't very familiar with. And Islam is one of them. There are many different sects. Most notably, and relevant for this discussion, are Sunni and Shia.
Oh my god, I feel like a fucking child who's like just being lectured by some mental midget who just read like the Wikipedia article for Islam for the first time. Everyone fucking knows what Sunni and Shia are, dude. Like, are you fucking kidding me? It's like, this is as condescending as trying to explain to your audience what the difference between a Catholic and a Protestant is. Like, Jesus, this is like a guy who just like learned some of the most basic things about the world for the first time, and he's all excited to tell his audience all about them, as if it makes him smart to recount this shit. Jesus, dude.
Multicultural, multi-religion group of it's Islam. So the Soviet presence in Afghanistan, and they were using these guerrilla tactics, and it was pretty interesting, right? Really, really cool, right? Until America, recognizing they could benefit from the Mujahideen, funded them and gave them weapons with money funneled through the CIA. They funded them and they armed them. And eventually, the Mujahideen were able to repel Soviet influence out of Afghanistan around the time of the end of the Cold War. Many of you probably already know about this, right? A lot of you probably do, especially this next detail I'm about to bring up. The thing is, after all was said and done, you now had this group that had a lot of disagreements that was brought together under a mutual interest that is now no longer there, that are extremely armed and now have a lot of disagreements, fundamentally, culturally, and especially religiously. Sunni and Shia Muslims don't usually get along too well. So, civil war broke out all across Afghanistan. Lots and lots of civil war. It's very bloody. A lot of civilians were hurt. A lot of towns were destroyed. And it sent Afghanistan reeling into chaos. I'm putting it very mildly, by the way. Like, whew, it is wild, okay? It was really bad what was going on there after the Soviet Union fell, okay? Now, a large group of, I believe, Sunni Mujahideen, which were no longer really called the Mujahideen anymore, ended up forming a new group called the Taliban. And the Taliban had a lot of power in Afghanistan. They took it over, basically, especially Kabul, which is the capital. They took over Kabul, and they put in a hyper-reactionary government.
It's very inaccurate to say that the Taliban took over Afghanistan. They took Kabul, yes, but the situation before the US invasion was very fragmented. It was kind of like China during like the early 1900s, where you had like, sort of big warlord type guys who like controlled their specific areas with changing allegiances depending on however the wind blows. So like to frame it as like the Taliban were in complete control is wrong, and also kind of whitewashes the fact that the USA, upon invading, basically indiscriminately attacked a lot of the warlords who might have been inclined to ally with them, and pushed them towards joining the Taliban, which made the Taliban extremely strong.
It's hard to even call it a government. It was more of a dictatorship or a theocracy. Is that the right word? There was no voting, and what the Taliban wanted happened. And the Taliban, their ideology is extremely, extremely reactionary. I'm talking no women allowed to work, no women allowed. You might have heard of it.
So he's I get what he's doing here, right? He's going like the Taliban is bad, and if the US leaves, the only thing that's going to happen is the Taliban is going to take over, right? So he's priming up to get to his point, right? The Taliban is terrible. They're the worst thing in the world, blah, blah, blah. And if the US leaves, they will immediately take control. That's exactly what he's going to say. Let's get to the important part.
Control. The Taliban are so bad that even the people of Afghanistan don't want America leaving if it means the Taliban.
I clicked a random fucking thing in the video and he's like, right?
And there's still a very big danger to the good things that America has helped do in the country. Now, America wants to leave. Many.
It's not really controversial to say that Afghanistan before the US invasion, ruled by the Taliban and everything, was better off than it is now. Okay? Just because there's a massive degree of the escalation of violence all over the country.
You may be wondering, well, why is that a bad thing? Well, the Taliban are so bad that even the people of Afghanistan don't want America leaving if it means the Taliban retake control. And the Taliban have said that they will execute any citizens of Afghanistan that helped America, and they will reenact any terrible policy that used to be in place before America helped liberate the country, most of the country, of the Taliban.
Actually, the Taliban reached an agreement with the USA in February 2020. The whole idea behind all of this, is that eventually the Taliban will be integrated into the Afghan government through continued talks, etc., in some way, without giving them some concessions here and there, but not allowing them to have control of specific areas, and not compromising on things like women's rights and voting and stuff like that. Okay, so this guy's talking about what Afghans want. Okay, let's look at this Asia Foundation poll. Now, the Asia Foundation is was a CIA-funded organization. It still receives a lot of its funding from the US government, but that's okay because even their polls still make certain things very clear. Okay. So, as far as what do Afghans say are the most important things in a peace agreement? Okay. By far, the least important thing is the presence of foreign military forces in Afghanistan. The least important thing. That's the number one thing that they're all willing to give up above anything else. Okay? Apart from that, big issues are stuff like women's rights, having a constitution, a democratic system, blah, blah, blah. But the presence of foreign military forces is extremely, extremely low on the list, okay? And there's a reason for that, okay? People want peace. Anyone can just read this document that I just brought up. I'll link it in the chat. And the number one conclusion that you get from reading this is that Afghans want peace more than anything else. There was a part of this, or perhaps there was a survey from another year where they asked people if they were in favor of blanket amnesty for Taliban fighters and integrating them into the government, etc. And most people said if they agreed to peace, some sort of peace deal or peace process, yes. Support for differing conditions in a peace deal. Okay. Blanket amnesty is provided for Taliban fighters. Majority support in every single wave. A role in the government is given to the Taliban. Majority support in every single wave. Okay? And then you have stuff like women may longer work outside the home. Basically no support. Women and girls may no longer attend school. Basically no support. So the issue here is that this guy who just brought up zero sources for any single thing that he said in his entire video, literally none, you can see he just doesn't bring up an article or anything for the entire video, claims to speak for Afghans and what they want, when what is clear here from any reading of these Asia Foundation polls, for whatever flaws they may have, one is that Afghans understand completely that peace and a withdrawal, or at least a peace process and a withdrawal, are tied together, right? There is no withdrawal, there is no peace without first foreign troops being withdrawn, okay? You can't get around that. It's the Taliban's number one condition. It has been forever. So as long as US troops remain in Afghanistan, you are making peace impossible. you're making it so that the only possible solution is essentially total annihilation of one side. Okay? Pretty sure we don't want that. So we're operating with a very circular sort of logic here, right? Where US troops must stay until there is peace, but that means by default that peace is going to be impossible. So it's essentially just an argument for infinite US imperialism is what this is being said here. I mean, I'm pretty sure the Afghan state is not secular. The Afghan state is literally an Islamic republic, is it not? Yeah, Afghanistan is a unitary presidential Islamic republic, officially the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan. It's literally in the fucking name. It's not a secular state already, okay? It's an extremely conservative nation. So introducing the Taliban into the government, you know, isn't going to result in Afghanistan becoming, you know, much more conservative than it already is. It's just where they disagree with most people is in terms of women's rights more than anything else. So yeah, let's see what else this guy has to say.
Control. If we look at the polling data, 73% of Afghan people that were surveyed say that they would not like if the US accepted a peace deal with the Taliban that did not keep women's rights to work outside of the home.
Yes, exactly. He's also leaving out the fact that they do not consider the peace deal to be, I mean, they do not consider troops staying in to be an important part of any peace deal at all. Right? Because these are negotiations, right? Okay? So the idea is that you negotiate with the Taliban for peace and you exclude that, right? But to even get to that point where we're talking about these things, the US needs to withdraw first, right? But his idea, obviously the idea here is that if the US withdraws, immediately the Taliban takes over. That's also kind of bullshit, right? The Taliban is 20,000, 30,000 strong in terms of fighters. That's a very high estimate. Some are 10,000. The US has 2,500 troops in Afghanistan, okay? The Afghan army has 200,000 troops. So this idea here that the US is the only bulwark holding the Taliban back is fucking patently absurd. Even if we go to, like, for example, Radio Free Asia. You know, the Taliban controls lots of land, okay? The Taliban controls lots of land. This orange part, these oranges are the contested zones, right? Taliban control is here, and contested zones are here. But what people look at, right? They look at maps like this and they say, oh, the Taliban controls lots of land, blah, blah, blah. But this is like random rural areas, okay? They control a couple of big cities, relatively big cities, and that's where most of their population comes from. But if you look at the actual population down here, am I blocking it? Yeah, I am. If you look at the actual, oops, that's not what I meant to move. If you look at the actual population down here, right? What do you see? Well, the Afghan government has control of obviously most of the population. Well, not in a complete majority if we count the contested areas, but way more than the Taliban, right? So they control much more valuable sorts of areas, at least in terms of human capital. So this idea that the Taliban is some sort of basically on the brink of invading fucking Kabul tomorrow, you know, they're instantly going to storm in and take over if 2,500 US troops leave is fucking absurd, right? For one, they couldn't do it, okay? Because US troops leaving does not mean that foreign support for the Afghan military in terms of economics, in terms of arms imports, you know, is gone, right? Obviously not. So it's just it's bullshit framing. The Afghan military are the ones who are doing most of the fighting already. For two, it's assuming that the Taliban have no interest in peace at all, okay? Which is, again, complete bullshit framing. Because the Taliban would not be attending fucking arduous peace talks in third-party nations and agreeing, signing the fucking shaking the fucking hands of negotiators. Like, there's a photo, I'll show you. Everyone wants peace, okay? Everyone wants peace, no matter what. Even the Taliban wants peace, and they're willing to give up something for it, okay? What would that something be? Probably their singular control over the areas that they currently hold. Women's rights is a big point. Voting is a big point, etc. Deals like this have been made all over the world, such as in Colombia most recently, for example, with integrating the FARC into the government. So what is going to happen here, or what would happen, what would have happened if fucking Joe Biden didn't move the withdrawal until September and essentially ruin the peace deal that was already sort of in process with the Taliban, is that there would be further talks between the Taliban and the Afghan government post-withdrawal of these essentially very small numbers of US troops to agree on what things are going to look like to achieve peace, right? And it would probably be something like amnesty for the Taliban, as was as I just showed that most people want. It would also probably be integrating the Taliban into the government in some form, which would probably mean giving them seats in parliament, like having them form a legitimate political party, and obviously not compromising with them on things. The Taliban is not in a good negotiating position for certain things, right? They're not in a good negotiating position for abolishing democracy, for one. They have none of the leeway for that people think they do. They control, in terms of population, a quarter of the territory that the government does. They have a tenth of the manpower, far worse armaments, etc., right? We're not talking about, an Islamic fundamentalist movement that is in a dominating position on the negotiating table, okay? So there's no way that they could possibly, unless they literally said, we're not going to agree on this, then there wouldn't be an agreement, okay? Right, and in that case, we can talk about like foreign support coming back in to fight the Taliban, because foreigners leaving doesn't mean the Taliban are going to take over fucking immediately, okay? They have no position to argue for like their wants for women's rights being implemented. They're in no position to argue for the abolition of democracy, etc. in peace talks, nor could they possibly, in any reasonable view of the situation, take over and just implement their will on everyone, okay? These people are just spreading absolute hysteria. They're relying on the fact that the audience wants to believe that the Taliban can do all of these things, kind of, because they want to justify continued US imperialism in Afghanistan. So it's essentially taking advantage of an ignorant audience who doesn't want to know anything about the issue, doesn't care about it, to say that, we need to stay here because if we leave, the Taliban is going to take over. And that's just leaving out every single little thing about the peace deal, leaving out all the details, especially the fact that the US violated it by moving the withdrawal to September, and leaving out the fact that no one wants the Taliban to take over, which is why no one's going to let them take over, okay? It's not going to happen. It's not a realistic thing to be afraid of. And, they would have to make far more compromises in any sort of peace negotiations than the other side would. Far more. And, obviously they are willing to make these compromises, or they wouldn't have ever come to these bilateral negotiations on the issue. They would never have agreed to a deal with Trump, etc.
As well as 85% that said they don't want a peace deal if women and girls are no longer able to go to school.
See, he's dishonestly framing this as so he goes, one, the Taliban is terrible, hates women, they're awful on women's rights. Two, most Afghans don't want to compromise on women's rights. Three, this means that therefore if the US leaves, the Taliban will take over. Therefore, if you support the US leaving, you support the Taliban taking over and doing all these bad things. When, as I just kind of explained, that's incredibly bullshit, dishonest framing. It's the sort of thing that like a neocon in Washington would do. Just total bullshit.
The vast majority of the people in Afghanistan do not want America leaving if it means the Taliban retake power and roll back all these positive things that have happened.
See? I have these fucking morons pinned. Like, the thing that I always do is I always learn the talking points like by heart, and then I can just preempt them. It's crazy how predictable these people are.
And in the time since America occupied
taking my fucking a bit of a vape, God, who watches this shit, man?
We have a problem. Do we want Afghanistan to be stuck in a perpetual war between American soldiers, the militias that are working with America, and the government of Afghanistan against the Taliban? Do we want more civilians to die? Do we want more of this to happen? Or do we want to just leave, clean our hands of the situation, and leave Afghanistan and its people to suffer under the rule of the Taliban?
I also want to note that this framing as well, in particular, is very, very, very... I mean, it's not sneaky at all. It's obvious, right? It's a sort of framing that supported the war in Iraq. If you either want the Afghan people to be crushed under Saddam's boot, or you want the US to be in Iraq and stop that from happening, okay? But what's left out is the fact that, sometimes having a fucking awful, terrible government, doing tyranny is actually less bad than having a fucking war where tens of thousands of people are being fucking murdered every year in the crossfire, okay? Some semblance of stability under a fucking awful government can be better. Doesn't mean it's good, doesn't mean that anyone supports it, doesn't mean that the government isn't evil, okay? It just means that literal fucking perpetual war is worse. That's a very fucking low bar, okay? If Iraq had not been invaded by the USA the second time, right? If Saddam had been allowed to stay in power, right? Iraq would be better off right now. That is a fact. And that doesn't mean that Saddam was good. Doesn't mean that I endorse Saddam. Doesn't mean that I deny any of his atrocities. All that it means is that a literal fucking genocidal war is worse than having an awful leader in power who does awful things, okay? It's kind of revealing here that, like, me and Xanderhal are looking at the same polls, right? He says that he's doing all this amazing research. He's looking into this issue really deeply. I mean, let's look at his famous fucking tweet. It's honestly a meme. It's probably the funniest shit I've ever seen. I've been doing a lot of research on Afghanistan and the Taliban, and withdrawing the US troops from there right now would be really bad. And so what research did he do, right? He looked at a map and read a poll, okay? But he read the poll obviously very selectively because he missed these things that I found in 2 seconds, right? I literally opened that poll and I scrolled down to like a random page and boom, right there. Afghan people don't think that having foreign troops in the country is important at all as a condition for a peace deal, okay? It's like the first thing they're willing to give up is that as peace talks go on, right? So we're looking at the same poll, but he's just ignoring the parts that kind of make him look stupid, right? And he looks at Google Maps, okay? That's it. He somehow didn't find any of these details about the 2020 peace talks where they literally signed a deal to begin the ending of this war. Oh yes, I read some surveys selectively. I left out the parts that basically flagrantly, at the very least, flagrantly contradict me and that I wouldn't need to actually look into, right? If I was going to prove my point, if I was going to argue for my position here. Somehow misses the fact that Joe Biden actually delayed the withdrawal from Afghanistan. Somehow misses the fact that he was flagrantly violating what had been agreed in February 2020 by fucking Donald Trump, of all people.
And it is suffering, by the way. The people of Afghanistan do not want the Taliban in power. It's a horrible situation.
They don't want the Taliban in power, but they are factually okay with the Taliban being in government, okay? A part of the government, not in government, not controlling it, but as a part of it, as I just fucking showed, right? 60% plus are okay with it. If it means peace, they're okay with it, right? Having peace, having stability is infinitely fucking better than giving some admittedly awful conservative concessions to the Taliban, but than not having, it's infinitely worse than having to give some concessions to them in whatever way. They're also in a terrible position, so whatever concessions they get, they're not going to be the super important ones, like democracy, like compromising so-called democracy and compromising women's rights, right? They're probably going to be shit that, if we're being honest, most Afghans probably agree with, because it is, again, an incredibly conservative Islamic country.
We're stuck between a rock and a hard place, and I don't know how we solve this problem. That's the big difference between this segment and most of my subjects. Most subjects that I cover. Usually I have a solution.
You don't know how we solve this problem? There was a fucking peace deal agreed last fucking year. You fucking fucker.
I don't know what we can do in this situation. All I know is that right now, leaving the country would result in the people of Afghanistan suffering.
You know what is going to result in a lot more suffering? Staying in the fucking country and making peace impossible.
The Taliban was a problem of our own making. America gave the Taliban the weapons they have. And now we're fighting them while they're using those weapons. It was a problem we made, and I feel like a problem we're almost obligated to solve as well.
This is the circular logic of American imperialism. The US creates problems, intentionally by the way, and then uses those problems to justify continued imperialism, right? It's a cycle. And all this is intentional, right? It might not be exactly planned, but you know, the US was not sad when ISIS popped up, okay? Because ISIS popping up in the middle of Iraq, in the middle of Syria, you know, in that sort of area, was like, holy shit, we have a reason to stay now. We have a reason to get more troops in there. We have a reason to do more drone strikes. We have a reason to do more bombings, etc. Essentially, we have an excuse to try to extend our geopolitical influence in the Middle East. It's ISIS, right? No one likes ISIS, right? Everyone wants to get rid of ISIS, right? Well, so do we. Guess we need to stay. That's how this shit works.
I don't think the right thing to do is for us to pull out right now. We are not guaranteed at this point for the people of Afghanistan to not have to endure more rule by the Taliban again. Both options suck.
This idea that the US pulls out literally just 2,500 troops and the Taliban takes over immediately. It's complete bullshit. It's complete bullshit framing. It's honestly, this guy should just go and work for the fucking State Department. Go work for the Department of Defense, dude. You would be welcomed with open arms. You know, you're just spouting their talking points verbatim.
But I don't think leaving is the right choice. I'm really interested to read the messages, the chat messages, and the comments on this video when it goes up to see what you guys think we should do. What do you guys think is the best decision here? I'm really curious. But hopefully you guys enjoyed that little foreign policy lesson. I definitely didn't cover everything.
Foreign policy lesson.
Completely in full. This is a very complicated situation. I recommend you Google America, like Afghanistan, Taliban, something like that on YouTube. You'll find a lot of news reports, a lot of videos going.
This guy's just telling the audience, Google random shit, you know. Google random shit. Watch the mainstream news about it, you know.
Over the history of it, and it goes into a lot more detail. This is more of a brief overview than anything, but hopefully I explained to you why it's not as cut and dry as American imperialism bad. We should have been out of there a long time ago.
That's literally is as cut and dry as it is. So I mean, it's just a fucked up situation, and these people who are basically trying to justify it with a circular logic that would ensure that the war would never end, that peace would never be achieved.